What happens when the one person who was supposed to protect a secret walks into the room where that secret is sitting? Before we go any further, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe right now, because what you are about to see is one of the most emotionally powerful moments ever captured on Family Feud. Steve Harvey has stood at that podium through thousands of episodes, thousands of families, thousands of stories. But on one Tuesday afternoon in the fall of 2024, a mother said 4 words that stopped him completely. 4 words that made a grown man freeze in the middle of his own show. And when you hear what those 4 words led to, you will understand why the clip was watched over 50 million times before the week was out. Some secrets do not age well. They do not quietly dissolve with time. They grow heavier. They press against the walls of the people carrying them until something, somewhere, gives way. What you are about to see is the moment a wall gave way, live, on national television, in front of 200 strangers and a camera pointed at everything. Gloria Reyes was 61 years old, a retired elementary school librarian from San Antonio, Texas, who had spent 34 years putting the right books into the hands of children who needed them. She was a small woman with silver, streaked hair she wore pinned up, reading glasses perpetually pushed to the top of her head, and the particular steadiness that comes from a lifetime of working with other people's children while carrying something unresolved about her own. Her son, 40-year-old Carlos Reyes, had grown up knowing 2 things about his family with absolute certainty: that his mother had sacrificed everything for him and his younger sister Marisol, and that his father, Eduardo, had left when Carlos was 3 years old and had never come back. That was the story. It was simple. It was clean. It had the kind of hard edges that discouraged further questions. Carlos had not asked further questions. He had built his life on the foundation of what he knew. A good life, by any measure. He was a civil engineer in Houston, married to his college sweetheart, Denise, with 3 children of his own, twin boys aged 12 and a 9-year-old daughter named Rosa. He coached his son's soccer team on weekends. He called his mother every Sunday without fail. He was, in every visible way, a man who had made peace with his history and moved forward. What Carlos had not known, what he had never been given the opportunity to make peace with, was that his history was not what he had been told. Gloria Reyes had met Eduardo at 19, loved him with the full force of a young woman who had not yet learned to protect herself from the consequences of loving fully, and had married him at 20. Carlos arrived quickly, and then Marisol 2 years later. Eduardo was, by Gloria's private accounting, not a bad man so much as a deeply incomplete one. Charming and present when things were easy, absent in every way that mattered when they were not. He had left when Carlos was 3, the way certain people leave suddenly, without sufficient explanation, leaving behind a shape in the room where he had been. But Eduardo had not simply disappeared. He had remarried. He had moved to Dallas. He had built a second life, and in that second life, he had had a son, a boy named Toms, who was now 36 years old, who had grown up knowing his father as a steady, dependable presence, who had been given the version of Eduardo that Carlos and Marisol never received. Gloria had known about Tomas since he was born. Eduardo had told her, not with any cruelty, simply in the flat, factual way of a man who considered it relevant information she should have. She had sat with that information for 36 years. She had told herself that telling Carlos would accomplish nothing, that it would only hurt him, that the half-brother he had never met was a stranger and would remain a stranger, and there was no reason to rearrange a life around a stranger. But Tom's Rise had not stayed a stranger, not in the age of DNA ancestry testing. 18 months earlier, Carlos had taken one of those tests as a gift from Denise, who had done her own and found a cluster of distant cousins she had not known existed. Carlos had done it the way you try something you expect to be mildly interesting. The results had come back with a half-sibling match. 37% shared DNA, the platform said. The algorithm did not care about secrets. It had simply reported what the biology said. Carlos had contacted the match. Thomas had already known. He had taken the test specifically hoping to find exactly this. He had been told about Carlos and Marisol by his own mother on her deathbed 2 years prior. Told that his father had had a first family, that there were half-siblings in San Antonio, and that she had always believed they deserved to know one another. Thomas and Carlos had been exchanging messages for 14 months by the time the Family Feud taping was arranged. Carefully, tentatively, the way you handle something that might break. They had spoken on the phone twice. They had not yet met in person, and neither of them had told Gloria. The Family Feud appearance had been Marisol's idea, a 50th anniversary celebration of their mother's retirement from the library. A fun afternoon, a story for the grandchildren. She had organized it down to the last detail, as Marisol always did, and had said nothing to Carlos or her mother about what she also knew was coming, because she was the one who had told Toms to apply for the opposing family slot. Marisol, it turned out, was done waiting for the right moment. She had decided to make one. The morning of the taping, Carlos Reyes drove to the studio in Burbank with Denise beside him and his twin boys, Mateo and Diego, in the back seat arguing pleasantly about something that would not matter in 10 minutes. His mother and Marisol had flown in from San Antonio the night before and were already in the green room when Carlos arrived. Gloria was dressed in a rose-colored blouse she had bought specifically for the occasion. She had her reading glasses on top of her head. She looked happy in the uncomplicated way of a woman who expects the day ahead to be ordinary. In the adjacent green room, Thomas Reyes sat with his wife, Carmen, and 2 other family members who had been let into the plan and had agreed, with varying degrees of nervous energy, to play along. Thomas was a broad-shouldered man who worked in construction management in Dallas, quiet in the way of people who think before they speak. He had his father's jaw, a detail that Carlos, when he would eventually see a photograph months later, would find simultaneously unsettling and clarifying. Thomas had spent the drive to the studio in near silence. Carmen had held his hand for most of it. Steve Harvey came out to the usual welcome and introduced both families with his signature warmth. The Reyes family from San Antonio, Gloria, Carlos, Marisol, Denise, and the twins, received a long cheer from the audience, partly because Gloria's backstory as a retired librarian had been mentioned in the pre-show briefing and the audience had already decided they loved her. The other family, introduced simply as the Reyes family from Dallas, received equal warmth. Carlos, standing at his podium, registered the surname on the other side. He went very still. He looked at Marisol. Marisol looked at the floor. Carlos looked at the other podium, at the broad-shouldered man who was already looking directly at him with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite a question, but somewhere between the two. The expression of a person who has rehearsed many times that the actual moment feels simultaneously familiar and completely unreal. Steve Harvey, beginning his pre-game banter, caught the thread of tension between the two men immediately. His hosting instincts, honed over decades of reading the temperature of a room, registered it without fully understanding it, the way you notice a change in weather before you can identify which direction the wind has shifted. He moved through the introductions. He asked Gloria about her library career. She told a story about a boy who had refused to read for 6 years until she put a book about motorcycles in his hands, and the audience adored her entirely. He asked Thomas what he did for work. Thomas gave a brief, polite answer. He was not there to charm the room. He was there for one reason. The game began. Both families played well, but the energy at both podiums was muted in a way that the audience likely attributed to nerves. Carlos buzzed in on answers he had barely considered, operating on the muscle memory of a man who has watched Family Feud his entire life, while the other half of his brain was doing something else entirely. Mateo and Diego, his 12-year-old twins, were focused and competitive and entirely unaware of anything unusual happening at the adult level. The Cole family won the main game. Steve Harvey called them forward for fast money, and that was when Gloria Reyes stepped away from her podium. It was a small movement, deliberate and unhurried, the movement of a woman who has made a decision and intends to honor it before she loses her nerve. She walked to the center of the stage. Steve Harvey, microphone raised for the fast money introduction, paused. "Gloria," he said, instinctively matching her register. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" The Gloria looked at Steve Harvey with the level, direct gaze of a woman who had spent 30, 4 years looking at children and telling them the truth about things. "I need to tell my son something," she said. "I should have told him a long time ago. I am not going to leave this stage without doing it." The room went quiet in the specific way of a space that has just understood it is about to witness something real. Steve lowered the microphone to his side. He did not speak. Carlos, still at the Fast Money podium, was looking at his mother with an expression caught between alarm and recognition. The expression of a son who knows his mother's serious face, who has seen it deployed at school conferences and hospital waiting rooms and gravesides, and who understands that whatever comes next is going to matter. "Mijo," Gloria said, using the word she had used for him since he was 3 years old and his father had first disappeared, the word that had always meant both his name and her entire commitment to him. "The man on the other side of this stage is named Toms. He is 36 years old. He is your father's son from his second marriage." She paused. "You have a brother. You have had a brother your whole life. And I am the reason you didn't know." Carlos Reyes did not move. Mateo and Diego looked at each other. Denise put her hand over her mouth. Marisol, who had engineered the entire afternoon and had been braced for this moment for weeks, felt the full weight of it arrive anyway, and had to press both hands against her sternum to keep herself upright. Steve Harvey stood at the center of that stage and did not say a single word. His face, a face that has expressed every human emotion on camera, a face professionally trained to fill silence with warmth or wit or energy, was simply still, watching, present, absorbing. He understood, in the way of a man who has lived through his own chapters of family complicated by silence, exactly what he was looking at. Carlos Reyes stepped out from behind the Fast Money podium slowly, the way a person moves when their body is operating a few seconds behind their mind. He walked to the center of the stage. His mother had not moved. She stood there, hands clasped, reading glasses still on the top of her head, as composed as a woman could be who had just detonated something she had been carrying for 36 years. Thomas walked from his podium as well. The two men stood in the center of Family Feud's stage, several feet apart, looking at each other with the peculiar intensity of people searching for something familiar in a stranger's face. Carlos was the first to speak. His voice was quiet and unsteady. "You knew about me." It was not quite a question. 14 months, Tom said. "We've been messaging for 14 months. He paused. "I wanted to meet you in person. I didn't want to be a message on a screen." Carlos absorbed this. He turned to Marisol. Marisol, to her considerable credit, did not look away. "You knew," he said. 6 months, she said. "I'm sorry. I thought this was better than a phone call." Carlos looked at the ceiling briefly, the gesture of a man recalibrating, pressing something back down that needs a moment before it can be handled properly. Then he looked at his mother. Gloria Reyes met her son's eyes. She had the expression of a woman who is not asking for anything. Not forgiveness, not absolution, not a reprieve from the consequence of a long silence. She was simply there, fully present, offering the truth she had withheld and whatever came with it. "Why?" Carlos asked. Just that word. He did not dress it with anger or with hurt, though both were present underneath it. He asked it the way a person asks a question they genuinely need the answer to. "Because I was afraid that knowing about him would make you feel like you were not enough," Gloria said. "That your father had replaced you with a son who got more of him. I could not stand the idea of you feeling that." She paused. "I was wrong. I know that now. I told myself I was protecting you, but I was also protecting myself from having to explain something I was ashamed of. And you deserved better than my shame becoming your secret." Steve Harvey, still standing to the side, still quiet, pressed his free hand flat against his chest for a moment. It was the only movement he made. Carlos was quiet for a long time. Then he turned back to Tom's. "Did he ever talk about us?" he asked. "My dad. Did he ever mention me and Marisol?" Thomas was careful with his answer, the way you are careful when the truth is partial and you want to give all of it and none more than is warranted. "When I was older," he said. "Not when I was young. He told me about you when I was in college. He said he had made mistakes that he didn't know how to go back and fix, so he had stopped trying." He paused. "I thought that was a coward's answer. I think that's why I took the DNA test. I didn't want to be someone who stopped trying. Carlos looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, slowly. The nod of a man processing something large and deciding in real time how to hold it. Eduardo is gone, Carlos said. He died 4 years ago. Did you know? Thomas nodded. I was at the funeral. He let that sit for a moment. You weren't there. Weren't told, Carlos said simply. The weight of that settled over the stage like something physical. 200 people in the audience understood, without needing it explained, exactly what it meant. That a man had died and left 2 families that did not know about each other to grieve separately, incompletely, each with only part of the story. Steve Harvey walked slowly back to the center of the stage. He stood between the 2 men. He looked at Gloria. Gloria, he said, you came here today and you did one of the hardest things a parent can do. You told the truth when telling it cost you something. I want you to know I see that. He turned to Carlos. And I see a man right now who is taking something very hard and holding it with a lot of grace. He turned to Tom's. And I see a man who refused to let his family stay broken just because it was easier to leave it that way. He paused, looking between all of them. Your father made choices. You don't have to keep paying for them. Any of you. Mateo, one of the 12-year-old twins, had climbed out of his seat in the audience and was standing at the edge of the stage. He was looking at Tom's with the unfiltered directness of a child who has not yet learned to manage what he is thinking. Are you actually our uncle? He asked. The room broke, not into the polished applause of a game show, but into the real, uncontrollable laughter of people who needed to breathe, who needed a moment of pure human honesty after everything that had just been said. Thomas laughed too, a real laugh, his hand going to the back of his neck. I think I might be, he said. Mateo considered this with great seriousness, then turned to his brother Diego and said, with complete conviction, I told you this was going to be a good day. Carlos Reyes pulled his brother into an embrace that was not smooth or cinematic. It was the awkward, genuine embrace of 2 grown men who don't know yet how to hold each other but are trying anyway. Tom's held on. The audience, most of them on their feet, let the moment be what it was. Gloria Reyes watched her sons. All of them, both of them, the word restructuring itself in her mind even as she stood there, and cried without making any effort to stop. After the taping, the 2 families sat together in the production's designated quiet room for nearly 4 hours. The twins fell asleep on a couch around hour 3, which, as Denise later said, was the most accurate possible measure of how long the day had been. Carmen, Tom's wife, turned out to share a near-identical obsession with mid-century Mexican pottery with Gloria, and they spent 40 minutes in a conversation entirely separate from the drama that had prompted the afternoon, which was perhaps the most normalizing thing that happened all day. Carlos and Thomas talked the way men talk when they have a lot of ground to cover and have agreed, without saying so, to take their time. They talked about work, about their kids, about Eduardo, carefully, with the particular respect people pay to complicated feelings about complicated men who are no longer present to clarify anything. Carlos told Thomas about the 3 years he had had a father before Eduardo left, which amounted to almost no concrete memory but a persistent and unnameable sense of absence. Thomas told Carlos about the father he had grown up with, present, functional, not always emotionally available but reliably there, and did so without apology or overclaiming, understanding that the disparity between their experiences was not something to smooth over but something to simply acknowledge. He was better the second time. Tom said, at one point, I'm glad one of us got that. Carlos said. He said it without bitterness, and Tom's understood that it had cost him something to mean it. Gloria and Carlos did not resolve everything that afternoon. That was not possible, and neither of them pretended otherwise. What they did was sit together for a long time, and at one point Gloria took both of his hands in hers and said, I spent 36 years believing I was protecting you. I understand now that I was also keeping something from you that was yours. Your brother was yours. You deserved to know him. Carlos held his mother's hands and did not say anything for a while. When he finally spoke, he said, I know you were trying to protect me, Mom. I know that's what you were doing. He paused. We're going to have to talk more about it. But not today. Gloria nodded. That was enough for the day. Marisol, for her part, accepted a short period of being the family member everyone was quietly annoyed at, and wore it with the philosophical patience of someone who knew she had done the right thing and was willing to absorb the friction that came with it. By the end of the evening, Carlos had put his arm around her shoulder and said, "Next time," a warning. She had said, "There won't be a next time." He had said, "I know. That's what worries me." They had both laughed, which was as close to resolution as siblings typically need. The episode aired 5 weeks later. Within 24 hours, it had generated more viewer response than any Family Feud episode in 3 years. The clip of Gloria walking to the center of the stage ran on every major news network. Late-night hosts referenced it. A prominent family therapist was interviewed on 3 separate morning shows about the psychological dynamics of long-held family secrets and the particular cost of protecting children from truths they have a right to know. Her central point, that secrets told late are painful, but secrets never told are more painful, was quoted widely. In the weeks and months following the taping, Carlos and Thomas built something neither had had a clear template for. A sibling relationship that began in middle age, without shared childhood, without the accumulated shorthand of growing up in the same house. It was, by Carlos's own description, the strangest and most worthwhile project of his adult life. They drove to meet in person for the first time in Austin, roughly equidistant between Houston and Dallas, 6 weeks after the taping. They had dinner that lasted 3 hours. They discovered they had nearly identical opinions about college football, opposing opinions about the best way to manage a construction project. Thomas planned in sequence. Carlos preferred working backward from the deadline, and a shared tendency to go quiet when something mattered rather than talk more. Their children met at Christmas at Gloria's house in San Antonio. The twins adopted Thomas's 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, immediately and completely, the way children absorb new family members when the adults around them are calm about it. Rosa, Carlos's 9-year-old, spent the entire afternoon following Gloria from room to room, which was what Rosa did when she was happy. Gloria cooked for 11 people. She had been cooking for smaller and smaller gatherings for years. She did not say anything about this directly, but she made enough food for 20. Family Feud's follow-up segment aired 4 months after the original episode. Steve Harvey sat with Gloria, Carlos, Thomas, and Marisol in a conversation that the production team had agreed would not be edited for time in the same way as a standard segment. They wanted it to breathe. Steve asked Gloria what she would tell other parents who were carrying similar secrets. She thought about it carefully, in the way of a librarian who respects the weight of words. "I would tell them that the secret protects you more than it protects your child," she said. "And I would tell them that the child grows up. They become someone who can handle the truth. You have to be willing to trust that." Steve asked Carlos what the hardest part of the months since the taping had been. Carlos said it was not what anyone would expect. It was not the anger or the grief or the renegotiation of his family history. It was the smaller thing, learning to think of himself as someone with a brother, when he had spent 40 years thinking of himself as someone without one. "It's like a muscle you've never used," he said. "It's not painful. It's just unfamiliar. And then one day you notice it isn't unfamiliar anymore." Steve turned to Thomas last. "What do you want people to take from this?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. Carmen, beside him, put her hand on his arm. "My mother told me about Carlos and Marisol when she was dying," he said. "She said she'd always thought they should know each other. She'd thought it for 30 years and never done anything about it, because it wasn't her place. She asked me to do something about it." He paused. "I just did what she asked. If there's a lesson, it's that. If you know something that belongs to someone else, some part of their story, some piece of their family, give it back. It's not yours to keep." Steve Harvey sat with that for a moment before he spoke again. When he did, he addressed the camera directly, the way he does at the end of moments that have genuinely landed in him. "Somebody watching this right now is holding something," he said. "A truth that belongs to someone they love. They've been holding it for years, telling themselves the time isn't right, the person isn't ready, it would only cause pain. I want you to hear what this family is telling you today. The time doesn't get righter, the person doesn't get less ready, and the pain of knowing, I promise you, is smaller than the pain of never being told. He paused. Share this video. Pass it on. Because somebody you know needs to see it. And if this story reached you today, if it moved something in you, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because we are going to keep bringing you the moments that matter. Carlos and Tom's drove home separately that day, to Houston and to Dallas, to their own houses and their own families, and the ordinary Tuesday evenings that had resumed, as ordinary Tuesdays do, regardless of everything that had changed. Carlos called his mother when he got home, as he always did on Sundays. It was not a Sunday, but he called anyway. Gloria answered on the second ring. They talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular. It was, by every external measure, an unremarkable phone call. But Carlos, sitting in his kitchen after they hung up, thought about something Tom's had said over dinner in Austin, that the word family was one of those words that expanded to fit what you put into it, that it was not a fixed thing, that it was, in fact, one of the most elastic words in the language. He thought about his mother cooking for 20 people at Christmas. He thought about his daughter Rosa following Gloria from room to room the way she did when she was happy. He thought about the twins, who had already asked 3 times when they were going to see Uncle Tom's again. Some things, once they begin, simply continue, not without difficulty, not without the occasional weight of what was lost before they started. But they continue, which is its own kind of miracle, the ordinary, quiet, unheroic miracle of a family choosing to know each other. Gloria Reyes still has her reading glasses on top of her head. She is still, by every account, the woman who puts the right thing into the right hands at the right moment. She is just doing it, now, with a somewhat larger family to do it for. Script notes word count 500 words estimated video length, ED 22 minutes at 1:21:50 WPM calibrated for the 45-65 demographic pacing standard. Call to action placements Act 1's first 45 seconds tied directly to the emotional stakes of the hook, and Act files a closing segment, delivered in Steve Harvey's voice as part of his final on-camera address. Both CTAs are integrated into the narrative flow rather than inserted as standalone prompts. Framework alignment, all 5 acts present. Moral hook. Character setup, the struggle, the turnaround, and the legacy. Emotional journey follows the 12-point arc for the 45-65 demographic. Resolution patterns and authority intervention. Harvey as moral anchor, combined with community rally, siblings, children, and extended family converging. Key psychological triggers: moral justice, family values, generational wisdom, instant karma, and nostalgic authority. Pacing 2535%, struggle to 20%, climax 20%, resolution. Distinguishing the humor beat in Act 4's the 12-year-old twins breaking the tension is deliberately placed at the peak of emotional saturation as a controlled release valve. Consistent with the framework's guidance on pattern breaks every 203 minutes to maintain engagement and prevent emotional fatigue in the target demographic.